sport. Now, one of the most extraordinary battles you'll ever see in the PSL is actually not on the field this season, and it has to do with a COVID-19 case that was first reported in December by Kaizer Chiefs, and they reported at the time that over 30 members of the club had tested positive, were affected by COVID-19. We don't know how many players and how many staff members, but certainly everyone at the village in Naturena was affected, and they subsequently had to close their training facilities and said they could not take part in matches at the time, and they requested a postponement for their matches. We'll give you those boards there that you see on air to just help you make sense of the conversation that we're going to be having at the moment with a sports lawyer. His name is Shane Wafer. He has done plenty of sporting battles in the courts in his time. You've done cases, Court of Arbitration for Sport. He's had battles against the World Anti-Doping Agency and FIFA and everything. So he's well versed in the topic that we're going to be touching on. Shane, thank you so much for your time this morning. Your impressions, first of all. I know you've been following this case very closely and how it's gone in the last 4 months or so.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. I think this is a discussion which is at the tip of everyone's tongue right now. Everyone would like to know what is actually happening. My overall impression of the case is, and I'm sure you'd agree and most fans would agree, that it's taken a bit too long. I think this dispute initially aired at the beginning of December. We are now almost 4 months later, and we still haven't had a resolution to the dispute. Ultimately, I think there is a lot of faux pas that occurred in this case. Unfortunately, there were a couple mistakes that were made at the beginning, teams and officials scrambling to try and correct some issues. And
sort of like we didn't know how to deal with this particular case. We hadn't catered for it. There was no provision for this in football rules or statutes, as is the case with literally everything. Nobody ever prepared for COVID-19, and we all had to learn as we went.
Absolutely. Extraordinary circumstances, let's call them. We'll discuss just now. Exceptional circumstances is a little bit different. But certainly we could never have accounted for this scenario when the rules were drafted, for example. There was a situation earlier on in the year with Cape Umoya United where the exact request was made by the club for postponement of fixtures as a result of COVID. And one will find that perhaps we could look to that decision with a view to why this decision was made now. That they sit on opposite ends. Obviously, Cape Umoya's request was denied at the time, which is in line with the PSL's decision to decline Kaizer Chiefs' initial request for postponement. Obviously, this being overturned by Advocate Kasim in his most recent award. So there is a little bit of precedent for the matter. Unfortunately, this latest arbitration decision overturns that precedent and leaves sort of two parties, whether or not the postponement was correct or whether or not it was an incorrect decision. We'll leave that.
So that's exactly what I wanted to get into, the matter of precedent in this situation. And certainly we can all agree that the Cape Umoya decision, because they were dragged across the coal by the PSL for not honoring a fixture. So it had a bearing on how you now dealt with the Chiefs matter, which was a lot more, which was in the spotlight a whole lot more because of who Kaizer Chiefs is. But did the PSL make a mistake with, there was a circular earlier last year, I think August, about 4 months, before the Kaizer Chiefs case. There was a circular that went around that COVID-19 will not be considered extraordinary circumstances to not play matches.
Correct.
Did they make a mistake there already?
Yes, so I think it's key to distinguish the two aspects of this matter. Whether or not it was correct, we can discuss now, but the rules provide for the PSL, it gives them the power to postpone matches in exceptional circumstances. Now, when that circular went out, it was made clear by Ms. Modladla that exceptional circumstances and COVID don't work together. Now, whether or not that decision, I'm not a medical expert myself, but there are plenty of smart people sitting at the PSL that considered that decision, whether or not it was correct. This doesn't, however, exclude the possibility of clubs being allowed to present COVID as a reason for postponement. One thing we must discuss is that the rules make allowance for clubs to postpone matches in terms of Rule 9. It's clear, and Advocate Kasim made this quite clear in his ruling on the 18th, that Kaizer Chiefs failed to properly apply the rules, and they failed to properly apply for a postponement of the matches in terms of the rules. Whilst they did communicate with the PSL, I believe the first letter was received on the 2nd of December, 2 days before the game. They didn't follow the correct procedure, which would have required them to apply for postponement 10 days before that game. Now, I believe that takes us back to the 24th of December. If you actually read the ruling, you'll see that Kaizer Chiefs announced their first positive test being on the 18th, that a week later they conducted multiple tests, contact tracing, and that on the 25th they had already started testing players. Now, whilst it does take time for the results to come out, we see in this decision that it does not start, the dispute does not start on the 2nd of December. It goes all the way back to the 18th of December. Advocate Kasim lamented Kaizer Chiefs for not following the rules, and I think that's key here. The exceptional circumstances requirement is over and above the application for postponement of matches. When the PSL decided to not postpone the matches, it was because, for the very reason that Kasim mentioned in his, Advocate Kasim mentioned in his ruling, Kaizer Chiefs did not properly follow the rules, which, of course, we can discuss now, but they have been severely punished for in the ultimate decision.
But then what Chiefs is crying is that, okay, now we didn't have a team to play. We had about 31 members of our overall staff affected. Already that means, they didn't disclose how many players, as I said earlier, but already that tells you that there's a significant number of people at Kaizer Chiefs who have an issue now, and everyone, because remember, contact tracing was still a factor also at the time, and also they later disclosed that the number had risen to 36, and then later to about 51 members of their staff. So what do you do then? We don't have a team to play. Okay, cool. We don't have, it's not exceptional circumstances, but what do we do?
Of course, and this is where the battle of the boardroom comes to the fore. Often we don't quite understand what is happening behind the scenes, and the award that was issued by Advocate Kasim actually gave us a little bit of insight into that. What he did announce was that on the 2nd of December, in the letter sent to the PSL, Kaizer Chiefs announced that only 17 of their players had tested positive. I believe 9 of their technical staff and 5 administrative staff, ultimately resulting in a number of their team and expanded team having tested positive for COVID. Now, in the decision, Advocate Kasim mentions that they have over 60 players in their squad, including their extended junior squad. He didn't quite go into detail about why none of those players were considered. At the time, he made it quite clear that it cannot be disputed that the rules were not followed. However, he has extraordinary powers granted to him in terms of the SAFA rules, which provide that he can conceptualize the dispute and come to an ultimate decision that is best for both parties. Now, his decision was ultimately that it would have been reckless for Kaizer Chiefs to have fielded a team at the time. Whilst I'm not a medical expert, I believe Advocate Hofmeyer, who represented the PSL in the dispute before the arbitration, hit the nail on the head when she said it's not about fielding the best team, it's about fielding a team. Now, I think that this is key here, that
so
the question
Chiefs were
could be asked,
desperate to field the best 11 they
and
can.
remember that they applied for a postponement of all 5 matches in December. They didn't just apply initially for a postponement of their first 2 matches. Ultimately, the players recovered and they were able to play their matches after Golden Arrows. But initially, they applied for the postponement of all 5 matches. So it begs the question, first and foremost, why did they not follow the rules at the beginning? Would they have a powerhouse legal team available to them? Whilst I understand that they may have been faced with a difficult circumstance, we don't understand how the rules correctly work. They needed to get tested. There's various reasons why they didn't follow it. But again, if they have 60 players available to them, surely they could have fielded some sort of team, maybe perhaps out of respect for their opponents. And you know, there are various things we can discuss here, but ultimately we must go back to the fact that rules are in place and they unfortunately weren't followed.
Shane, the question that a lot of people struggle to reconcile in this situation, and a whole lot of situations when it comes to football, is which takes precedence? The law of the land or the football rules? Mm-hmm. And the tricky thing is that the law of the land now involves government, and government interference is frowned upon by FIFA. It becomes tricky, lines are blurred and everything. What in this situation should be the top and binding rule?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or law?
And this is a concept which we go back and forth with in the sports law sector. Some of the traditionalists might say that the rule of the land always applies and should apply over and above any of the rules applicable to sports federations and within the sports industry. However, the younger crop of sports lawyers, such as myself, firmly believes that the rules of football should be applicable under, in all circumstances with respect to this dispute. And why I say that is because often the law of the land and our courts don't have quality enough precedent in order for us to see what has happened in the past to allow us to make decisions. Whilst this is completely different in the concept of sports disputes. You'll see that FIFA and their DRC, our PSL DRC, in fact even our SAFA Arbitration Tribunal has ventilated many disputes within the sports industry, and there is a good amount of precedent that allows arbitrators and panelists to make decisions based on rulings. While it is key to remember that a party always has the option to go to court, mm-hmm. And that is made applicable, that is made available to members within the rules, that urgent relief can be sought from the courts. There is also a rule that provides that all disputes must be ventilated within the rules. So there is the PSL DRC and there is the SAFA Arbitration Tribunal should a matter go to appeal. Mm. I believe that sports matters and sports legal issues are so unique and nuanced that the rules are made available to them for a reason and they must be followed. It's extraordinary to go over and above the rules to apply the law of the land, which isn't so much done overseas. You'll find overseas in Europe, before the CAS and before the FIFA DRC, they very rarely like to step on the foot of the law of the land. Yeah.
So what happens now, because the PSL, there's been murmurs, there's been word on the corridors that they might go the litigation route. They're not too happy with the SAFA ruling by Advocate Kasim or when they were ordered to release new dates for the matches, missed against Cape Town City at home and away against the Golden Arrows. They were not too happy with that. Litigation looks like is the PSL's next step.
Yeah, sure.
What happens now?
So I've heard the same thing, and in fact, I think Mr. Khoza released a statement saying that at the time he can't comment on the matter and he is not aware that there is any actual decision to go on review. The PSL has two options here. They either apply for a review of the arbitration decision of Mr. Kasim on the grounds that either there was gross irregularity in the conduct of the proceedings or that he exceeded his powers, which we can discuss in depth a little bit more now, but I do not believe...
I don't have time for that, but we'll talk about it on the side.
For sure. But I don't think that their grounds for the review of the matter are as strong as some people might suggest. The alternative to reviewing the matter before our own courts is to apply for an appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in terms of both the FIFA statutes and our rules. Whilst our SAFA rules might not specifically make provision for an appeal, Article 58 of the FIFA statutes does make provision for an appeal of a final decision of a league, which this is, or an arbitration body that flows from the league. And, of course, there are time limits applicable to that. They have, I believe, until the 8th of April to file a dispute or to file a statement of appeal with the Court of Arbitration for Sport.
Do you think we'll go that way in just 5 seconds?
I think no, because what's important here is we are 2 months away from the end of the league, and I don't think that the dispute will be ventilated by then. So I think, practically speaking, I don't see an appeal or a review going forward, because ultimately the decision will come after the end of the season, which will make it, practically useless.
Well, we've seen stranger things in the South African League. Shane, Wafer, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully, we won't go the Court of Arbitration for Sport route, which will mean the season might be dragged on after May, and it'll be a situation sort of similar to the one we saw with the Royal AM last season. Thank you so much for your time.